and welcome to Transforming Language Education, the vodcast series where we will talk about the future of teaching, inquiry, and advocacy in language education. I'm Jen Crawford.
And I'm Rob Philback. Please like or subscribe if you want to join us in helping to transform language education.
All right, welcome everyone. So glad you're with us. Welcome to Transforming Language Education, our vodcast sponsored by the MAT TESOL program here at USC. Today we're excited to have you with us, and I'm very excited to have a guest host today, Dr. Katya Moore. Welcome, Katya.
Hi.
And today we're going to be talking with Luba Hodges, and I'll let Katya you introduce her.
Hi, everyone. So good to be here. Luba Hodges is faculty at the International Academy here at USC, but she's also a good friend of mine and just a wonderful human being. Luba, thank you so much for being here with us today. And we're really excited to talk to you about all of the experiences, the interesting experiences that you have had throughout your career in teaching language.
Wonderful.
Thank you for inviting me.
And so we're going to have three segments with Luba. And the first one, we're going to be talking about her experience mastering the English language. Then we're going to move on to her experience opening an immersion language camp in Russia. And then finally, talking about her experience starting a Russian school in West LA. So we have a lot to talk about, and we look forward to it, and we'll jump right in.
Well, I began learning English at the age of 12, just like people of my generation in Russia started learning foreign languages in middle school. This is when I was introduced English. I was not that interested, I must say. I learned English throughout middle school and high school. But because I was not interested, I think it was mostly because of the teachers who did not have a lot of passion about their subject. So to me, I had an A in English, but this was not my favorite subject. And I never, ever thought that I'd be teaching English at an American university if somebody had told me in high school that I'd be doing that. So this is when I started learning it, but everything changed at the age of 16. This is when I really got interested in English.
Okay, so you had been taking English per the curriculum in the educational system there, but at 16 you sort of really got turned on to the language. What happened?
This was a pivotal moment in my life. I went to St. Petersburg, and I'm not from St. Petersburg or Moscow. I'm from a big city, but it's not a huge city. So I went to St. Petersburg with my friend, and we were both 16. We stayed at my friend's family, and the family invited a boy who was obsessed with the Beatles. And this boy came every evening and talked with us, and he had a crush on, I think, both of us. But as a background, he played the Beatles, and I was annoyed the whole time. I thought, okay, why would you play some music there? And then one morning, like 3 weeks later, I'm in the kitchen with my friend making breakfast, and I hear the song Michelle on the radio. And I remember the sunlight. I remember what I was holding in my hand. It just struck me. And this is when I wanted to learn the lyrics. And this is how it all started. And after Michelle, they played Yesterday right away. And I just went and I got a dictionary from the shelf and I learned the words. When I came back to my city from St. Petersburg, I was a different person. I told my family, I said, I want to learn English. So
that's fascinating.
What a story. So this is really, this is so interesting. So I'm wondering though, as you continued to learn English at school and then later at a university, was there anything in those educational settings that influenced your interest in how you pursued, learning English? Anything at all that you think influenced your interest in English, or approach to how you studied it that came from the school?
And I'm just building on that, especially because there's such a contrast, right, between what you just described from 12 to 16, sort of viewing language learning maybe as an obligation, and you wanted to keep your grades up and all of that, but then this really dramatic change and how interested. So yeah, I'm interested in that question too. Like, how did those two continue to work together as you went forward?
In my case, my middle school and high school experience in terms of English was not very good. In fact, I had teachers who were excellent teachers in other subjects, literature, and this is what I wanted to major in just because of the teachers. So my experience in middle and high school was, I cannot say anything positive about the system, because all we did in class was we read stories, we memorized phrases, we didn't really learn grammar, we didn't really learn vocabulary. We just, at school, we just had to know what the textbook said. But when I went to the university, and I got surrounded by passionate professionals who knew what they were doing, and the curriculum was amazing, I was really, really interested. My first year was very difficult, but because the teachers were passionate, professional, and we had all these subjects that were targeting specific skill,
Mhm.
I was amazed at how wonderful the system of education was in my university. And I graduated from two universities. I got my master's in my hometown, and then I got my PhD in Moscow. And I must say that my hometown was amazing, had an amazing curriculum.
So I'm just curious too. You're a language educator, and you've founded schools and immersion camps, and we'll talk more about that in later. But just so many of our listeners are language teachers themselves. Many of them are teaching in systems that maybe have very traditional, more teacher-centered ways and approaches. I'm just wondering how this experience has impacted you as a language teacher yourself. How has it informed your practice?
Mhm. To answer your question, I must say that when I was at the university, the education was more focused on absorbing the information. Like, input was very important.
Okay.
I was reading a lot of books, I was writing, I was learning vocabulary. We had grammar every day, we had phonetics. So this was basically absorbing. We had to go to the lab every day after our classes. Um, so my passive English was amazing. I could read everything, I could translate everything, um, but it was difficult for me to communicate. However, when I moved to the United States, in fact, even before that, when I went to England and I lived there for a couple of months, it took me maybe 2 weeks to where the output became more important than the input. So this was, I guess what happened was all the knowledge that I had just found a way to be expressed there because I was forced to speak only English.
Right, right. So, I mean, it sounds like a pretty interesting sort of argument for that role of input that you experienced for many years, but then also that the way that was just allowed to express itself in a new setting when we're in an English speaking environment. That's fascinating.
Yeah. No, this is so interesting, Luba, and I think that a lot of our listeners will relate to what you're saying, especially with the experiences of feeling like you are studying a lot, you're doing a lot of activities, but you're able to understand a lot, and you're able to process a lot. But at the same time, when the time comes to communicate And when the time comes to speak, then a lot of people may have difficulties with that. And so I think that this is very interesting. It's very interesting that you talked about that and brought that up as an important part in your own language learning journey. So from what you told us about and from your experiences, what are some of the key tips or key takeaways that you'd like to remind our listeners who maybe are pursuing a new language or maybe are pursuing a career in becoming a language teacher? What are some tips or takeaways that you would like to give to our listeners?
I know that there's a lot of information on the internet right now. I can share my personal experience, what worked for me to master the language. And it basically took me, I would say, 2.5 years of really learning 24/7. Like when I got interested in English, um, I didn't have a life. All I did was just the English. My approach was I read every day. I wrote down vocabulary. I set a limit of 10 words per day, and I kept a vocabulary log. So at the end of the week, I had 70 words. At the end of 2 weeks, I had 140 words, and so on. So I had a big notebook with vocabulary. And my dad and I had a ritual where every evening he would test me. He would ask me a few words in Russian, and I'd give him English equivalent. And those words that I forgot, I would just write them down. So I was expanding my vocabulary every day. Well, I had to write because I was at the university. I didn't like that, but I did write that, did write essays and summaries. And I also, this was a long time ago, so we didn't have access to TV. So I had a DVD where I would watch movies with subtitles. But now we have so many sources. Now we have podcasts. You can communicate with people. I think that my weakest skill was communication, but I found a way to work on that too. I had a girlfriend at the university who was also very interested in English, and she and I would just walk home, which took us about 40 minutes from the university, and we spoke only English. And of course, we made mistakes, nobody corrected us, but this was so much fun. And by the way, she became a professor at Moscow. She's teaching English too. So this was one skill that I had to be creative about.
Amazing.
As you're talking, and thinking about those skills of really focusing on using reading to provide input and build your lexicon by challenging yourself to keep a reading log or a vocabulary log and all of that. What I hear in that is just this notion of investment. Sometimes we think about the concept of motivation. I like Norton's idea of investment. You were clearly invested in this. And if we go back to the top, it sounds like it sort of started with this experience you had with this guest, who kind of introduced you to the Beatles and the music of the Beatles, and that really sort of turned something for you.
I would use the word obsessed, not invested. Yeah. I loved it.
But to go to make those kind of gains, like you said, in 2 years, and to have that kind of investment, I mean, that really is a takeaway for me in and of itself, right? Like, how do we engage learners and find their interests and the things that would get them invested, if not obsessed, in the target language that they're pursuing.
Yeah, invested so that they can spend the time doing it, so that they would choose to engage with English as opposed to having that 40-minute conversation in Russian on the way back home from school.
Yeah, and if we can increase the level of investment, then so many of these other things are going to sort of take care of themselves, or any number of strategies. They might pursue any number of those. Well, Luba, we really want to thank you for talking about your experience. Really fascinating, and just again, inspiring to hear how invested, obsessed you were, and how that really translated into remarkable gains for you in a critical period in your language development. So thank you so much. And I know our listeners are going to appreciate hearing about your story. So I'm Rob Philback. This is
Katya Moore.
and thanks for listening.
Thank you.